tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so thank you for asking me to do this session. I am, apart from being ordained 6 months ago, I'm the most junior monk. I'm the baby monk at Bodhinyana. I'm a Dharma baby, not a biological baby. Yeah, I guess. But and since in the recent years I've been reading so much because I'm an avid reader as well. I've just always loved reading my whole life. So. Before I was a monk, I had a very, very large library. In fact, it was so big that I couldn't fit it in my home. So I had to put it in my garage in lots and lots of boxes. So that was, when I became a monk, I gave them all away to the local primary school, and that gave me a lot of joy. And it was also letting go. And that's one of the themes in this book, is letting go. Yeah. So that's a good introduction. So anyway, that's why I was really happy to do this session, because of my interest in reading and of course my love for the Dhamma as well. So because I'm such a new monk, I just thought I'd very brief introduction, because a lot of you don't know me yet. So I've met some of you at Bodhinyana, obviously, but then you may not know much about me. So just very quickly, my hometown is Melbourne, so I grew up in Melbourne, and I went to school there. I went to university. I did psychology, did a degree in psychology, and then I did another degree in English with a minor in linguistics. And then I became a teacher, and I taught English as a second language. I did that in Sydney for a year, and then I taught in South Korea for 5 years in a university. And then I came back to Australia and I taught in the university sector in Sydney for a few years in education. So teacher training and curriculum, and also online learning, e-learning, that kind of thing. So my whole career was in education. And then, as I mentioned, I always been interested in Buddhism my whole life, and I decided to go for it, and I was very lucky to be ordained by Ajahn Brahm almost 6 months ago now. So that was the highlight of my life so far. Okay, so that's a bit about me, and now let's get into the book. So, and by the way, if you have any questions, I don't mind if you put your hand up. I'll pause during the session and give you an opportunity to ask questions, and I'll try to interact with you a little bit as well. But also, if there's anything urgent that you don't understand, then just put your hand up and it's fine. I'm happy to take questions on the fly as well. So, what I just wanted to start with this is the book that I chose, The Art of Disappearing. And I wondered, has anyone read the books yet or not yet? Yeah, you have, yeah. You said Manel, you're part of it, yep. So a couple people have read, yeah. How did you find it? Did you find it easy to read or difficult, or what do you think? Easy for you, yeah? Yeah, yep. Good, okay, yeah. The reason I knew, because I had a choice and I chose this one, I actually love the title, The Art of Disappearing, and I hadn't read the book yet. It was one of his books that I hadn't read, and I was very attracted to the title, The Art of Disappearing. I thought, it sounds kind of really interesting, and I wanted to read more about it, about the idea of disappearing, because we spend so much of our life doing the opposite, by trying to become somebody big and important, and so the idea of disappearing sounded really, really interesting, and I really like it. And it gave me a chance to read and read it. So now I've read it about 4 or 5 times, because not only to prepare for this session, but also because I really, really enjoyed it a lot. So it was published in 2011. So it's got about 148 pages or so, and it was. It's not a book that's written from scratch. It was actually comes from like some of Ajahn Brahm's talks, Dhamma talks over the years, and then it was edited into a book. They've kind of compiled it into a book, and I think that shows up in the structure of the book, because you have like there's 11 chapters, and each chapter has like short kind of sections. Several short sections in it, so that kind of it reflects the fact that they're excerpts from some of his talks, which have been put together into kind of themes. Okay, so and last month or so, you did your first book with Venerable Mettavihari, and he did, was it Question and Good and Bad? Yeah. So that was like one of his Ajahn Brahm's storybooks, so-called, where he's such a great storyteller, and he's written several of those storybooks. Well, this is a little bit different because it's more like a serious Dhamma book. It's got stories in it, of course, but there's a lot of Dhamma in here, like more like talking about Dhamma and also meditation. So it's kind of a contrast to the previous book you looked at. So that's good, because it shows that he can write different types of books. So yeah, it's fairly serious compared to some of his other books, which can be very, very funny. And then, there was his other book, Mindfulness, Bliss and Beyond, which is like a very comprehensive book on meditation, quite a manual step-by-step guide. So what I thought I would do is I would go through and talk about some of the main themes, and maybe just do some quotes, and then ask and see if you have any questions. Okay, do you have any questions? That's my introduction. Does anyone want to ask a question yet? Yes, Sechon. Learning magic tricks? Okay, yeah. So when I said, no, that's a good joke. Because that's Ajahn Brahm. You know what he said? He asked me, what book are you reviewing? And I said, The Art of Disappearing. He said, oh, that's easy, you can just disappear. So yeah, how about I just you can just have an empty chair, yeah, and do it like that, yeah. We can all disappear. Yeah, okay. Well, that's kind of like a good introduction, because what do you think disappearing means? What does that mean? In terms of Dhamma, what does it mean to disappear? Yeah. Right, yeah, no self. Letting go of worldly goods, yeah, definitely, yeah. Sorry, being in the present moment, yeah, absolutely, yep. So that's exactly right. So this theme goes right throughout the book, non-self, which he calls disappearing, and he looks at different aspects of that. And so what do you think that means, non-self? I think it's not always an easy thing to understand. It's not the easiest thing in the Dhamma. Doesn't mean that I don't exist. I'm not here. Yeah. You already said a couple of examples. Like he gives the example of someone on one of his retreats who was meditating and their hands disappeared. So when she was getting into deeper meditation, her hands just disappeared. She couldn't feel them anymore. So that could be kind of like the first experience of more a physical feeling of something disappearing when you get into deep meditation. There's also he uses a really interesting simile, and that was about the driverless bus. It's the simile of the driverless bus. This is on page 55. I'll read it out. Actually, yeah, I'll read that out, yeah. Your life is like a bus with nobody in the driver's seat. Do you know that feeling? Actually, sometimes we feel like that. We feel like everything's out of control, and we don't know what's going on in our lives. But he uses it as something positive. It's actually like you just understand that that's what life is like, and you kind of make peace with it. So anyway, I'll continue reading the quote. Your life is like a bus with nobody in the driver's seat. That's what the suttas and all the great teachers tell us, and it's also what I say. When you realise there's no one driving the bus, all you can do is sit down in your seat and stop complaining. Since there's no driver, there's no one to shout at to hurry up and get out of here, or ask to slow down because you want to enjoy the ride. You go through ugly territory, nice territory, and beautiful territory, and you're at peace with all of it. Every time you try to shout at the driver, you're not attending to what you're really experiencing or learning from it. You're getting involved rather than detaching, owning things rather than letting go, trying to make things happen rather than letting them be. Do you think that's a good simile for, yeah? So, it goes, and I think because this book is also about meditation, mindfulness and meditation, you can look at it through your meditation practice, that it's a process of letting go of yourself, but you can also look at it in terms of the outside world as well, like letting go of the world. Yeah. Now, I just wanted to read the preface because this is really, really great, very short, and it's really sums up the book really well. It's also very funny. So let's just quickly read the preface, because it's a great summary. Do not read this book if you want to be a somebody. It will make you a nobody, a no-self. I did not write this book. They are transcribed talks, edited with all the bad jokes removed. I did not say my bad jokes anyway. The 5 khandhas, which presumably complain to be me, said them. I have the perfect alibi. Myself was absent from the scene of the crime. This book does not tell you what you must do to get enlightened. It is not an instruction manual like Mindfulness, Bliss and Beyond, which was also written by those pesky 5 khandhas pretending to be Ajahn Brahm. Doing things like following instructions just makes you more of a person. Instead, this book describes how disappearing happens in spite of you. Moreover, it is not just the outside that vanishes. The entire inside, all that you take to be you, that also disappears. And that is so much fun, it is sheer bliss. Okay. The true purpose of practicing Buddhism is to let go of everything. Not to get more things like attainments to show off to your friends. When we let go of something, really let go, then it disappears. We lose it. All successful meditators are losers. They lose their attachments. Enlightened ones lose everything. They truly are the biggest loser. At the very least, if you read this book and understand some of it, you may discover the meaning of freedom and, as a consequence, lose all of the hair on your head. I acknowledge the kind assistance of other nobodies for transcribing the talks, and Ajahn Brahm for editing, and all the empty beings at Wisdom for publishing the book. May you all get lost. Not really Ajahn Brahm, Perth, July 2011. So I thought that was a beautiful preface. And it sets the stage for the rest of the book. Does anyone have any questions or comments so far? Yeah, Sichuan. Okay, grab the microphone, yeah?
Microphone.
Yeah.
Can you hear all right?
Yeah, it's good.
I'd just like to make a comment. Actually,
Yeah.
it is very short summary, but it really, in my view, is very deep.
Right.
And it is so well said because it is said in a layman's way. That's just my view.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
That's a good comment. Yeah, thank you. And I think that's true. And I think that's why it's such a good preface, because it's using humour to discuss something very serious kind of thing and very deep. And it's the rest of the book is more and more of a serious book, but it's a great introduction to the book because it makes you smile. And I think that's really, really Ajahn Brahm, isn't it? Because like he's all about having joy in your practice. Even when you're discussing these really serious subjects like suffering and, like old age, sickness and death and things like that, you can still do it with a smile. So that's one of his great gifts, I think. Yeah. Did anyone else have any other questions or comments? No? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. So, because the other theme that is quite important in the book is the theme of dukkha, or suffering. And this is where he talks about, the fact that suffering is part of life, and we can't run away from it, and we can't fight it. We have to kind of understand. I think he talks about that always throughout the book. It's having skillfulness and understanding the nature of the world. And he says, it's the Buddha said that the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, is to be understood. And you understand that not by fighting it or running away from it, but accepting it and transcending, perhaps, it as well. There's impermanence. So this is where he kind of puts it, he lays it all on the line, Ajahn Brahm, in this book. He really talks a lot about suffering and death, He has the story of Kisa Gotami. Do you know that story? Some of you, yeah? It's a really famous story in the suttas of a woman who her young child died, and this is really famous story that people tell. She was so distraught, she'd refused to believe her young child was dead. She went around asking people for medicine to revive her dead child, all of course in vain, and then someone directed her to the Buddha. She told him the story that her child was dead, and he said he would provide medicine for the child, but he would need to get some mustard seed from a family in which no one had died. So she went around from house to house, frantically looking for a mustard seed. That was easy. That was the easy part, finding a mustard seed. But whenever she asked if anyone in this household had died, they always said, yes, there's been deaths in our family. So she went to the Buddha and went back to the Buddha with this kind of understanding, death is universal, and she ended up becoming a nun and becoming an arahant through that teaching. But he tells lots of stories like that, you know. Sometimes when you have suffering, you don't know that it's suffering. You just get used to it. But the other side of it is sometimes you don't reflect on what's going to happen. You don't reflect on old age, sickness and death. When Ajahn Brahm was in Thailand, he suffered from a very severe illness of scrub typhus. He tells this story on page 83. And he was in hospital for a month, very ill. And when he was released, he was still quite weak, but he was over his illness, and he was so happy just not to be ill. And he says, for once, it was a happiness born of something disappearing. It wasn't getting something, but of something disappearing, which was the suffering. The suffering of typhus was gone. For once, I actually appreciated my health. When you're in constant good health, you tend not to appreciate it unless you constantly reflect on the absence of pain or illness. In the same way, so that's kind of another story, another perspective on suffering that he tells. And also, he tells about his encounter with death. He talks about his mother suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and also the death of his father he found when he was just 16. So these are some of the stories that he tells about dukkha. Can you remember any other stories like that, or? Sorry?
Story yesterday.
Oh, the Apachara story, yeah.
That's the other one.
Yeah.
Patachara, how she lost everything.
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't think he tells that in the book,
No,
does
not
he?
in this book, but yesterday
But that's
he
a
talked
similar-
about last night.
Yeah, that's good, yeah. Yeah, thank you, yeah. Any other comments at the moment? Yep. Over here, please. Yep. Yeah.
As I was reading it,
Yeah.
I found it was a bit depressing after a while.
Yeah.
And that, because I work in the library
Yeah.
off and on, people often come in and they, you know, maybe often new to Buddhism,
Yeah.
and they may have done some meditation classes. And
Yeah.
they often want to get one of Ajahn Brahm's books, but
Yeah.
having really read it properly more and tried to understand it,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd give this
Yeah.
to someone interested or new to Buddhism, only because it's quite
Yeah.
strong, you know, after a while as you
Yeah.
get into it.
Yeah.
He's really
Yeah. I that's a really
giving
good
you some strong
good comment.
lessons
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
teachings.
You know, like I think it's even though you said it's easy to read, and that's just because his writing style, and also I think partly because it came from talks as well. But I agree. I think it's very like there is. He still talks about, you know, like there are still themes, nice lighter themes in the book, like joy, bliss. He talks about that, and he talks about using caring attention and kindness to yourself and to other people. But a lot of the book is quite uncompromising, and I think it's quite an advanced book, you know, in many ways. Because it talks quite starkly about, you know, like the reality of suffering. But of course in Buddhism the idea is not to get depressed by that, but to kind of face up to it, and then to kind of, you know, I used the word before, transcend. It may not be the right word, but learn to have some deep wisdom about it, you know, like that. But I think I agree with you that it's definitely not the sort of book you would give a beginner Buddhist. Yeah, yeah. It's more for an advanced book.
It certainly goes
Yeah.
more deeper into.
Definitely.
It even felt like it was like, you know, an advertisement for becoming a monk or a nun. Like it was
Right.
strong,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's sort of like, oh, you know, you sort of think this is really
Yeah.
powerful reading.
Yeah.
This
And
depressing.
yeah, great. Because that was a thing that struck me as well, is that in many ways it's a book that's quite challenging to a lay person, because he really says that it's not enough to just like go on with your life. When you understand deeply suffering and the fact that there's nothing we can do about it, he says the monastic life is the best lifestyle, the way to handle it. And so he kind of, it's a little bit of a book that's for someone who's interested in becoming a monastic. I think it's a good book for somebody like that, because it talks a lot about if you really want to go deeper and learn about suffering and face up to it, it's not good enough just to live a lay lifestyle. Becoming a monk or a nun is really the best thing to do, a thing like that. Yeah. But like you said, it's not all kind of that serious. It's a serious book, but there are other themes in it too. And so the other theme that was there is he talks a lot about mindfulness and meditation. So, and actually it's an interesting book because you've got that kind of big picture stuff about nibbana, like suffering and nibbana, and you have to, you know, he talks about the jhanas, going up to deep meditation and achieving enlightenment, because the only solution to suffering, he keeps on saying, is nibbana. That's the only solution. But having said that, there's a lot of practical advice in the book too. Yeah, so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
your business, like to leave
Yeah.
things alone.
Yeah.
Don't get involved in something that you can't change.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So for me, I think it's good for beginners.
Yeah. Okay,
Um,
that's an interesting, yeah.
Because someone told me that when they came here to take the Buddhist, when they became a Buddhist, they took the 5 precepts
Yeah.
and the 3 refuges. Somebody presented this book to them.
Yeah.
A stranger came and gave it to them, and
Yeah.
they read it and they were so impressed by it. So I
Yeah.
think it can be for
That's a
someone
good point.
starting off as well.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Because I think, we never know what point someone's at, even if they're a beginner, like if they're new to Buddhism, but if they've come from a life of a lot of suffering, which is, one path, especially I think in the West, a lot of Westerners come to Buddhism from a background of suffering. They've already had a lot of suffering and they're looking for solutions. Then a book like this could really speak to them because they've already kind of had that suffering, the experience of suffering. Yeah, and of course you never know what, even if you're a beginner Buddhist, you never know how advanced they are in terms of their mind, kind of thing, yeah. There is a lot of practical advice. One lovely story, because when he starts talking about mindfulness, he talks a lot about, he's got a whole chapter on mindfulness, and one story I thought was really, really great story and really vivid story was, he was talking, it's on page 90, and it's about when he was in Thailand. He's talking about like what happened when they often have pretty primitive, kind of living conditions in those days in Thailand. Their sandals used to fall apart, and that sometimes the flashlights would not work, they wouldn't have enough batteries, and they had to walk barefoot. There are lots of snakes everywhere, and he tells the story about having to walk along the paths where there was like snakes all around in the dark, or just with only starlight, with no sandals, bare feet, and without any torch. And he said, well, I understood their danger. So that's kind of the side of wisdom, understanding the danger. And then he had to use his mindfulness to keep himself safe. And he says here, because I knew there might be snakes on those paths, I set up my mindfulness to look out for them and regard them as dangers to be avoided. Because of that, I never got bitten. I had informed my mindfulness and used a basic form of wisdom to make sure that if I saw any snakes, I would make a detour. You can do exactly the same thing to avoid being bitten by negative states of mind. You use mindfulness to stay aware of the dangers. Yeah, and it just goes on like that. Like snakes, once they get you, you're in big trouble. So use your mindfulness to recognise the negative states as soon as they arrive, and then take another route. So, and there's also, before I go on, are there any other questions or comments? No? I just wanted to tell you another story, and this was like you mentioned before about being in the present moment. That's a really strong theme in this book. In fact, that's what mindfulness is, trying to, in terms of letting go of your past and your future, and just dwelling in the present moment. So that's another kind of disappearing, I guess. And one story, a couple of stories he tells which are really, really good about that. Let's see. P58. So when he was in Japan, his host, he was in Japan and he was put up in a 5-star hotel. This is on page 58, and they forgot that he had to eat by midday, so he didn't have any lunch. And then it was a very noisy hotel, where he could hear some noises and stuff. So, and I ended up sitting in this room that people pay a fortune to stay in, thinking I'm in a prison. I was in a prison in a 5-star hotel because I didn't want to be there. I soon realised what I was doing, and it put a stop to that stupid state of mind. But the point is that you can be in prison in a 5-star hotel or on a sunny beach. It doesn't really matter where you are. Any place you don't want to be is a prison. And then, on the same page, he talks about there was a monk in Thailand who was put in jail. He was innocent, but he was put in jail because someone accused him of being a communist. And he was in jail for 2 years. And he said the monk loved that time in jail. He didn't have to give any talks, speak to people. He had good, simple food, a nice little room. He said it was wonderful to have so much freedom. So if you want to be in the prison cell, you're free. So he says, that was a very deep, powerful teaching, wisdom teaching for me. I realised it doesn't matter what I'm doing or where I am. Whether I'm in an aircraft or answering silly questions or in a crowded city, if I want to be there, then the mind becomes still. So, yeah. Therefore, when you're sitting in your room, trying to meditate and the mind isn't still, don't make a problem out of it. Simply say, I want to be here, and then it does become still. But he does go through a lot of, he does give a lot of advice, really great advice on meditation, mindfulness and meditation practice, talking about also how to use wisdom in your meditation practice, and of course talking about samadhi, that's stillness, what he calls stillness. And as I mentioned, he talks about the joy of meditation, when you get joy, and he talks about how to calm your states of mind. And so on. Does anyone have any questions or comments? So, I just thought one great section of the book was when he talks about the problems of meditation, when it's not quite working right. what to do. He gives practical advice when your meditation is not going well. So everyone's had problems. Do we have any meditators here? Yeah, a few meditators, yeah. So, what are some of the problems that people have? What do you think? What are some of the problems people have with meditation? Common problems, things that are not so easy. Yes?
Some days you get either a neck pain or a back pain.
Right.
You never had before, and you constantly get notice the pain, which tends to override everything else, and you
Right.
kind of accept it and say it's okay, the pain can be there.
Yeah.
But mindfulness keep going back to the same thing.
Right.
Same thing, and it just wander around it rather than moving into the breath.
Hmm.
Even if you pause to the breath, then you will see that you are angry with the pain because it
Right.
stops you from meditation.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to say it's okay, but
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes you have to give up the
It's
meditation.
very hard, isn't it? Yeah. 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 Good. That's a good one. Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts of what is things that are sometimes not easy or difficult? Noisy. Noise. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Yep.
As for me, I find the biggest hindrance is the self.
The self. Yeah. Yeah.
I acknowledge that, and it's
Yeah.
a really big hindrance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Occasionally it's tougher because you reach a point whereby you relax, you let go of everything,
Yeah.
but the mind becomes dark and you fall asleep. So letting go is you can do it, but I think there has to be some form of nudging or pulling it back yourself, back to be aware of the total letting go. So
Yeah.
I've got these two hindrances here. And
Sure. Yeah. 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 That's really good. He talks about that. He talks about when you in the early stages of meditation, it's not important the object that you're focusing on is less important than the way you're meditating, the attitude you bring to it. And he talks about like the most important thing is not to make bad karma, new bad karma when you meditate. And what he means by that is when you're trying to get too much involved, personally involved in the meditation, you're either telling yourself that you're doing a bad job and you feel upset, or you're reacting too much, or you're fantasizing about something else, you know, or your thoughts are running around, can't settle down. And the idea is that never ever fight those things. It's not easy because we're conditioned to like try to prevent problems and to fight against it, or the other way is just to kind of get more deeply kind of absorbed in it, you know. But he says you have to use your mindfulness not to just like observe what is happening, but not react to it. And one great, like he talks about some other problems, like I'll just mention the other problems. Boredom, right? When you kind of sit there and you sit there for like 30 minutes and you kind of, okay, what do I do now? You know, like looking at the clock, you know, and kind of, I'm sitting here and I know I should sit longer, but you know, restlessness, where you kind of fidgeting and you can't sit still, you're not calm. Tiredness, when you kind of fall, you sit down and straight away you're kind of getting sleepy or just dull. And then, of course, desire and ill will. But there's a great little story he tells, which is kind of like, he gives it in the section on restlessness, but I think it's his advice for this is also is a general advice whenever you have problems in meditation, what to do. So I'll just quickly tell you about this really good story. So it's called The Water Buffalo Mind. It's on the top of page 40. So this is named after an incident that occurred outside Wat Pa Nanachat in Thailand when Ajahn Jagaro was the abbot and I was the second monk. Early one morning, when I had already gone on alms round, but Ajahn Jagaro was still in the monastery, a man came running into the monastery with half his finger missing. He had been taking his water buffalo out to graze when the water buffalo got scared and tried to run away. The rope holding the water buffalo was wound around the man's finger, and when he tried to hold the water buffalo back, the rope tore half his finger off. Of course, it was a very bloody finger. So Ajahn Jagaro got a car and took him to the hospital. I saw him a couple of days later with bandages on and then with only half a finger. This happened because he didn't know how to deal with a restless water buffalo. He should have just let it go. Here's his advice. You should use the same strategy when the mind is restless. Just let it go. Don't try to hold it back. If you try to stop or control it, the mind just gets more wanton and more difficult. All you need to do is say, "Okay, mind, if that's what you want to do, off you go." Your job is just to be mindful and at peace and watch where this silly old mind wants to go. Your job is not to stop the mind, but to watch it, understand it, and be kind and gentle with it. So I think he talks, that's like the kind of advice that he gives for all of these problems. You don't try to stop it or control it. Let it go, but watch it, observe it, and don't make... I think for him it's how you meditate is more important, the most important thing, how you do it, the attitude. Having kindness to yourself when you meditate. So when you're not doing it perfectly, straight away bring in that kindness. And he calls it caring attention in one of the chapters, caring attention. So I can see that we're almost out of time. Yeah. Did anyone have any other questions or comments? It was I really enjoyed it. I mean, I really liked the book a lot, just to give my evaluation. So it's kind of got, like we said earlier, it's got the big picture about suffering and renunciation, nibbana, but also it's got really good information about mindfulness in everyday life and and meditation. And being a monk, I love a lot of the Dhamma in it as well. So I didn't really focus on the Dhamma too much. I more told stories, partly because that's the way he teaches. And I thought that would be a good way to talk about the book. But there's a lot of good Dhamma in there, a lot of Pali terms, dukkha, anatta. He talks about nibbida, which is weariness, fading away, viraga, sati, mindfulness, panya, wisdom, and so on. So, I guess at this point, probably wind up. Are you going to read it? If you haven't read it yet? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Any final questions or comments? Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it. Yeah, okay. All right. Just do Namo Tassa 3 times. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa.